Hello and welcome to Scottish Rugby Podcast. Today, Chris and I will have a look at the weekend's fixtures in Europe, as well as a look ahead to the Pro 14. With last week's announcement that Scottish Rugby have invested in Old Glory, Washington's MLR Rugby Club, we'll have a deep conversation with Scottish Rugby's Chief Operating Officer, Dominic McKay. Today we're going to have a deep look at the announcement that went out from Scottish Rugby last week that we've taken a minority stake in Old Glory, Washington's MLR club. I'm joined today by Dominic McKay, Scottish Rugby's Chief Operating Officer, to ask some of the questions that you've sent in on Facebook, as well as talk about the underlying themes as to why, what and where we are doing in America. Dominic, great to have you here. As I say, we're going to have a good look at the questions that came in on Facebook, as well as the underlying themes as to what's going on in Washington. Can you start by giving us a brief reminder of what went out last week?
Yeah, we were really delighted last week to announce our partnership with Old Glory in Washington, this new Major League Rugby club, which has just recently been established and that will take part in the new competition in America from 2020 onwards. And we're really excited about that. America's a growing rugby environment, and it's great for us to partner with a new club. And it's a bit unusual for Scottish Rugby to partner with clubs in America, so we've been doing a lot of due diligence on the league and rugby in America over the last sort of few years, and we couldn't be more thrilled to be partnering with Old Glory. The guys have just recently named the club. Up until a few weeks ago it was Washington MLR, and they've renamed it Old Glory in recognition of the name that's given to the national flag of America, which sits in the Smithsonian Library in Washington. So they're very, very proud and very patriotic of that flag, and naturally that's great that we are investing in the nation's capital, because it means we've got access to the I guess the national flag's legacy and history, and they're very excited about the name, and I would let them comment on that in much more detail. I'm not the person really to comment on that, but as a set of partners, Paul and Chris have been absolutely outstanding. It was a pleasure to host them both during the Six Nations, where they got to see Scotland in all its pomp at a Six Nations game, and I think they were blown away with the welcome that they received from our board and from many of our partners. But these guys are really invested in the club. They're really invested in the rugby community in America. Paul Sheehy, extraordinarily successful entrepreneur, running one of the largest car dealerships in North America, based out of Washington, himself played at the highest level, played in the Rugby World Cup for the USA.
The rugby guys, as well as being successful businessmen, they're rugby guys. Yeah,
and that was important to us, that we were partnering with people that understood the values and the respect that rugby has. It's not purely a business transaction for these guys. This is a passionate play for them because they're so invested in the rugby community. Both of them are rugby coaches still, and as I mentioned, Paul played for the USA Eagles national team. And they currently invest in a number of rugby activities around the wider Washington area. So it was natural, given our conversations that we'd had with them before around Pro 14, that we extend those conversations into MLR. So yeah, quality people that we're really proud to be partnering with, and I think they see us as adding some extra spice to their understanding of professional rugby, because that's a bit new to them.
As I say, we took some questions in from Facebook, and one of the underlying themes is the reallocation, if you like, of funds that could be spent, and some people are saying should be spent in Scotland. The fact that people are talking about state schools, they're talking about our pro teams. Is this money that could be staying in Scotland that we are now pushing across the pond?
Well, what we are passionate about as Scottish Rugby, and I guess as the guardians of the game in Scotland, is making sure that we give every young person an opportunity to play the sport at every level. And we're investing and have invested in record sums over recent years in grassroots rugby and state school rugby, in our clubs, in our professional clubs, Glasgow Warriors and Edinburgh Rugby, and importantly also in the stadium. And we'll continue to do that. It's been really pleasing over the last sort of few years to grow our financial base and reduce our debt. So this last year we recorded a turnover of almost 60 million. So we've doubled the turnover in a short few years of Scottish Rugby. So the income levels have never been higher. And at the same time, our debt level has never been lower for a generation. We're down to only 2 or 3 million of a debt. So we've paid back that debt, which at one point was around 20 million, and doubled our turnover. And we've been able to do that through a number of, initiatives, whether that's around broadcasting, whether that's around ticketing, or whether that's around sponsorship. But to do that against a backdrop of investment. So we've invested in every one of our areas in significant ways, and we will continue to do that because we are passionate about making sure that every young person in Scotland gets an opportunity to play the game, watch the game, and participate in rugby at some sort of level. So all the programmes we're doing just now, we want to continue to do as best we possibly can, and to do that we need the funds to do those investments, and we're going to work really hard to keep that going.
So what about the argument that the money and the money's been rumoured to be between $500,000 and $700,000 US? Could that not be directly put into an extra 2 or 3 players in one of our pro teams?
Well, over the last sort of couple of years, yes, it could. So that's absolutely. But over the last sort of few years, we've increased our investment into our pro teams, so that they're at the highest level they've ever been, both at Glasgow Warriors and Edinburgh Rugby. And what's been really pleasing is the outturn from that investment has been that we've got, just this past weekend, we've had 2 teams in the quarterfinals of Europe. That's incredible. Going back a few years, we weren't being quoted in Europe. Now we've got 2 teams. We had 2 teams in the quarterfinals, and that's something we're extremely proud about. And that's a testament to Richard Cockrell and to Dave Rennie and to the Glasgow team and the Edinburgh team doing incredibly well on 2 fronts, not only in Europe but also in the Pro 14. So we've invested wisely, we think, in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. But that's not our only investment decisions. We've got to invest at the grassroots, and that's why we've been investing, I think, £3.5 million last year into grassroots rugby in Scotland, and we'll continue to do that. So we are hungry to make the right sort of investments in the game. But the investment that we're making in America is really a small investment, actually, in the grand scheme of things. As I say, we turn over around £60 million. So that small investment, we think, has got a number of benefits, not just for rugby, but also for developing our brand internationally. And that's been something, globalising our brand is something we're very passionate about. So
when a decision's made, is this a commercial decision, a business-driven decision, or is it a rugby decision?
It's a mixture of all, actually. Firstly, it's a startup. So like any startup, and getting in at the beginning gives you an opportunity to shape and to support and to influence. And that's what we're excited about, getting involved in all the decisions, both on field and off field, to assist our majority partners. And they are majority partners. We're simply a minority stake. But the 2 partners that we're working with are real rugby men, great rugby men, and are passionate about developing that club and passionate about developing the club in a way which isn't just about the professional end, it's also about developing rugby in the wider sort of Washington area. So they're keen to learn from our rugby development people, they're keen to learn from our professional people about how they develop that club, and I think that's some of the reasons why they were keen to partner with us, because they could see that we understood professional rugby, we understood domestic rugby, and we understood sort of running big events, so we can try and assist them in a number of ways. And they're really exciting and really passionate, and the North American rugby market is growing. The sports market in North America is enormous. So if we can have just a small position in that market as it grows, that's got a number of benefits back here in Scotland.
Now we'll come on and talk about Old Glory in more detail. Before we do that, you mentioned the growth of the game, and the rugby landscape in the world is changing. There's external investment being talked about and already coming into the English Premiership. Is that a catalyst to be looking at these globalisation, these investments, other than what we would normally be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we're living in incredible times just now. I think rugby is at an inflection point, and almost in the same way that it was when the game went professional back in '95. And the reason I say that is because the sport's getting interest in it now from broadcasters, from agents, from private equity people that it just hadn't had ever before. And that shows that globally it's growing, and I'm pleased to say that Scotland's very much at the heart of a lot of those discussions. But the reason why it's growing is people see the value of unlocking certain markets, and one of those critical markets is the USA. So for us to be partnering with Old Glory in Washington chimes with that global change around our sport just now. But if I just sort of talk about the North American market for a second, if we look at the last couple of times Scotland have played over there, we've played in Texas, and the stadiums have been sort of 25, 30,000 of a crowd. So there's a real interest in America towards rugby. That Wales played over in Washington last year in front of about 35,000 people against South Africa at the RFK Stadium. So, Washington, America, there's a real interest in rugby. The Rugby World Cup Sevens actually took place in San Francisco at the San Francisco Giants baseball stadium last year, and I think around 100,000 spectators came through to watch that. And all those games are live televised across America. So there's a growing interest now in rugby in America. So it was natural for us to be sort of globalising our brand in that particular market.
Now, is this a Scottish Rugby decision, or is this a bigger Pro14 decision? That we are stakeholders, shareholders in the Pro14, and it's been voiced over the last few days that this is just an avenue for bringing in an American team into the Pro14, and it's been talked about in the past that there's ambition to do that. Do you see that potentially further down the line, Washington, the Old Glory, coming in and playing in Pro14?
Well, interestingly, the original conversation that I had with the guys in Washington was off the back of some interest that they had in joining Pro14. But naturally, our focus became South Africa with the welcoming of two clubs from the Southern Hemisphere into the Pro14. But we kept the dialogue going with Paul and with Chris over in Washington, and that materialised into the relationship that we've announced last week. We very much see the Washington club as being all about MLR, Major League Rugby, not about Pro14. We see them competing and developing and growing in the MLR construct rather than anything beyond the USA. And the reason we say that with such confidence just now is because MLR, Major League Rugby in America, the league, is growing. It's growing from strength to strength. There's clubs all across America now taking part. Clubs in Los Angeles, clubs in New York will come in, clubs in Salt Lake City, clubs in Toronto are coming in, clubs in Boston will come in. So there's clubs all across America now playing regular rugby in front of thousands of spectators. And some of those venues, albeit they're relatively small, maybe only 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, some of those venues are selling out. So what that tells you is that rugby is beginning to take hold in America, and it just requires a little bit of growth to have a significant impact on the growth of rugby globally, because the North American sports market is so important and so impressive. And I could definitely envisage a day down the line where the USA decide to bid for a Rugby World Cup. And it'd be great to be involved with the US well ahead of that, trying to shape some of their thinking.
So looking at the investment we're putting in and talking about the growth of rugby in North America, what crudely speaking, what's in it for us? Yes, there's the opportunity to be involved in something as it grows, but do we see a financial return coming back, and if so, when? And the second part of that question, what are we risking? What are we putting up that could be detrimental to us as a business?
So when you do any sort of deal like this, you spend a fair bit of time doing due diligence, as much as you can, on your partners and on the markets, both in Washington but across the US. And that meant we spent a lot of time talking to USA Rugby, who are the sort of equivalent of Scottish Rugby over in the US. Spent a lot of time speaking with other owners from other clubs in the MLR. We spent a fair bit of time speaking to broadcasters and sponsors. So before we got to a position of deciding that we wanted to do this deal and concluding the deal, we spent a fair bit of time understanding the North American market. And we see huge potential there, both commercially, but also in terms of rugby. And a little bit like the partnerships that we have in other parts of the world, including London and in Nice, there's opportunities for our players to develop, opportunities for our coaches to develop, opportunities for our back office people to learn new skills and develop new skills and bring those ideas back to Scotland. So the same is true in Washington. We certainly see this as being a rugby opportunity, a coaching opportunity, and a commercial opportunity. So for a relatively limited investment, we see significant potential returns, but we see it as a long-term, step-by-step journey. And we recognise that the US is a big market, but we only want to be relevant in one small way that will have a positive impact back into Scotland. And a good example of that, there's a couple of good examples, but one good example is the partnership that we've struck with Ledios. So Glasgow Warriors sponsor, they're also an Old Glory sponsor, and they're based in Washington. And that partnership is partly as a result of our relationship with Old Glory and the guys over in Washington. And we could see more of that happening. So some of the partners that we have in Scotland might also want to be partners in Washington. Some of the partners in Washington may also wish to be partners back over here in Scotland, whether it's Glasgow, Edinburgh or Scottish Rugby. So at a rugby level, lots of opportunities. At a commercial level, lots of great opportunities. I'm also passionate about the North American market because there's a lot of smart activities happening around matchday presentations and matchday activity. And we've got a sort of saying in the business that every day is a school day. So if we can steal and pinch and borrow ideas from the North American sports market, bring it back to Scotland to create a better experience for our fans at Glasgow, Edinburgh and Scotland, again, that's another added benefit.
You mentioned the commercial, Ladios, and the potential that there is for the commercial partners in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Scotland and Washington or the US. A number of years ago, a few years ago, we took the steps to position ourselves to be able to take significant external investment into our pro teams. Do you see this as an opportunity to gather some more momentum as far as bringing that investment into the pro teams? Does this give an avenue for people who potentially might want to become heavily involved in Glasgow and Edinburgh to also be involved in America, or is that not part of the thinking?
It's not massively part of the thinking, but naturally, as I said earlier on, rugby's at an inflection point. So there's people showing an interest in investing in rugby that have never been involved or shown particular interest in investing in rugby, and at significant levels. And if we look at the PRL deal, which is a fantastic deal, and it's a huge congratulations to them, you could imagine the same sort of deal being replicated in other competitions. So the Pro14 as a competition is a very attractive competition. So we could see investment potentially into clubs, but also potentially into leagues, and that's very, very exciting. And the same equally could happen over in North America. And it's no surprise that the commissioner that's running Major League Rugby in America was also a commissioner running Major League Soccer. So was heavily involved in the growth of soccer in America, and he's bringing his business experience and his smarts to rugby. So it seems to be a very sensible, credible business opportunity, but with a great rugby connection. And we're going to capitalise on that rugby connection over the next few months. We will bring our under-20s national team over to Washington to spend a week in camp, utilising the facilities that we've now got access to, utilising the backdrop of having a Scotland team there is great for the relationship. And it also assists them with their jet lag on their way down to Argentina to play in the Junior World Cup. But they'll also play a training game over in Washington. So it's a great opportunity from the get-go for our under-20 squad, management, coaches, to get to see our blossoming relationship in Washington firsthand.
You mentioned earlier on London and Nice. So London Scottish and the relationship we have out in Nice. There's already been a significant investment and a lot of time put into both of those relationships. Does the Old Glory, does the Washington relationship harm those or enhance those to your view?
I think it enhances them. And the reason why we're partly doing Old Glory is as a result of some of the success and positive feedback that we've had working with Nice and working with London Scottish. It has been great to see Dave Cherry, for example, spend time down in Nice, develop as a player, get in his contract into Edinburgh, and then also be invited into the wider Scotland squad. These are just opportunities that players, because we just have the two professional clubs in Scotland, might have missed out on. So by having opportunities, whether it's London or Nice or potentially Washington down the line, as an avenue for our players to develop and to get some quality game time, can only be good for their development and also only good for Scotland's development. We're not blessed with having a third professional team. We would love a third professional team, but it's extremely expensive to set up a professional club. So we see the relationships that we have in Nice and London and this new blossoming relationship over in Washington as at least feeding part of that requirement for a third professional team.
Third professional team, does this relationship in Washington not take us further away from having a third professional team in Scotland?
Not necessarily, but I think there's a financial reality. Running one professional club is extremely expensive. So you're talking of, you would need an annual budget of £10 million plus annually to run a third professional team. So that's a significant investment. We're not in that place yet. We would love to be in that place, but we don't have the playing base really to justify that, and we don't have the financial clout to justify that. So we're trying to manage that by having these partnerships in Nice and London and in Washington. But importantly, it's an opportunity for our coaches as well and our off-field staff to get their development opportunities and develop work in a different culture. We're really pleased that Super 6 will come along and offer 6 new opportunities for young aspiring Scottish coaches, and there's every possibility that Washington can act as a pathway for some of our coaches as well in due course.
What do their next 8 to 9 months look like? They won't be part of the Major League Rugby until 2020. They've talked about exhibition matches. You've talked about potentially that being involved with some of the Scottish teams at pro level or down into the club's Super 6 teams potentially as well, I suppose. But what does the next 8-9 months look like for Old Glory?
It's going to be a busy 8 or 9 months for them, and we, together we want to make sure we hire a head coach. We get a head coach that understands that they're taking part in a startup, and they've got to develop the sort of structures that are required for a new rugby venture. We've got to get the players recruited, so we're already starting the player recruitment just now. So we've recruited, I think, 3 or 4 players already, and announced those on the sort of Old Glory Twitter and website. But also make sure that we get ourselves set up with the facilities that we need, and we've got a great relationship with the universities over in Washington just now in terms of facility access. So it's about establishing the club, get the players in, get the coaches ready, get the sponsors ready, get the audience aware of what we're planning to do, so that when we hit the ground running in 2020, people are really proud of what we've managed to achieve in a relatively short space of time. And it is a short space of time. But we're motivated in Scotland to assist as best we can without taking our eye off the ball in terms of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Scotland or our grassroots. So all the programmes that we do just now, we want to keep doing, but we want to complement our expertise into Washington, and we're really excited about that.
You see that transferring back to the fan base in Scotland? There's a lot of expats who support Scotland and the pro teams and the clubs from all over the world. Can you see that happening from Scotland out to Old Glory? We're going to turn up to BT Murrayfield in a year's time and we'll see 20 Old Glory rugby shirts tucked in the corner.
Well, that would be nice. We would like that very much. But equally, there's a number of Scots in America who now potentially have a Scottish type club to support. We're blown away every time we go to America with the number of Scots that are so connected and so interested in rugby. We often do events, and you've done them with me before internationals or before big games, and the number of Scots that come up and travel and want to be part of those events usually blows us away. So I think there'll be a lot of Scots that will be interested in the wider Washington area in Old Glory and want to support it. And unusually as well, we are partnering with a club in a city which is a capital city, and as a result of it being a capital city, every embassy in the world, every embassy is based there for the US, and there's a lot of those embassies that have got real rugby nuts and real rugby supporters. So I think we'll be tapping in not just to the Scots expats, but a lot of international expats who want to come down and watch Old Glory.
You talk about some of the Scottish rugby fans who are over in America. There's also a number of Scottish rugby players in America, coaches in America. I think of Stevie Scott, who's over there coaching, Scott Murray, who's also over there coaching, Stevie Swindle, development officer in Houston. Will this give us an opportunity to maybe bring some of those people back into Scottish rugby? Well,
I think that would be fantastic. It's not an immediate priority because a lot of these guys are employed and have got very busy jobs. But I think it gives us an opportunity to have some conversations with a whole raft of people about getting involved and supporting this new project. And what's been great is that with Scott out there, with Stevie out there, these guys are already involved heavily in MLR, and we want to tap into their expertise and try and make sure that we can hit the ground running with Old Glory with all those expertise brought into the fold. But there's no doubt rugby in America is growing, but we want to make sure that whilst we help it grow a little bit, it's got real added value for Scottish rugby back here in Edinburgh.
Dom, thank you very much. I mentioned earlier we put out some questions to Facebook. I think it'd be worthwhile talking about some of those directly. We've covered many of the themes.
Sure.
But one of the particular questions was, is this just another recipe for players getting qualified by residence, not by birth? So it's about, I suppose, protecting the grassroots, the pathway into our national team. Yeah, so
there's no interest in that at all. This is a rugby opportunity to develop in a new market, and for some of our players to get some game time if appropriate, and for our coaches to get some experience as they work their way through the sort of coaching tickets. But the idea of it being used as a backdoor to develop players for the international, not at all.
Another question that's coming is there a university link? Will this offer playing/scholarship opportunities for young Scots in the USA?
It's a great question. It's something that I know our team over in Washington are looking at just now. They've got great links already with the universities in the Washington area and the schools in Washington. In fact, Paul Shee is a big investor in rugby in both universities and in schools. So it's possible. I've got nothing to sort of comment on that just now in terms of detail, but it's the sort of thing that's entirely possible.
So to follow up that question, will that be driven through our professional players, or will there be potentially opportunities for people who are coming out of grassroots rugby that will be able to grab that as well?
Yeah, so I can imagine that being the case. So, for example, we've got this great scholarship called the McKay Scholarship, and that gives an opportunity for young aspiring players to go and spend some time in South Africa or New Zealand or Australia, supported by the Robertson Trust, to develop their skills. And often those players come back and become professional players. So I definitely could see an opportunity for some of our aspiring athletes to go and spend some time over in Washington, perhaps through a scholarship similar to that McPhail Scholarship that served us so well over years.
So if I am in Haddington Rugby Club or Glasgow Accies or Ayr or anyone around the country, what can I expect the impact to be on what it will do for our club rugby, for our grassroots rugby?
Well, I think what it will do potentially is that it gives us an avenue in a market that's growing. So there may be some financial opportunities for us to partner with sponsors in America who are sponsoring Old Glory, that can sponsor Glasgow or Edinburgh or Scotland. And bear in mind, all the money that we generate as an organisation gets trickled back into rugby at all levels, whether it's the stadium, whether it's Glasgow or Edinburgh, and most importantly of all, whether it's our grassroots clubs. So anything that we can do to enhance and develop our revenue streams can only be good for club rugby. And it's a question I'm often asked is, what does it mean for me as a local rugby supporter at a local rugby club? Well, it means that your governing body is thinking differently. It means that your governing body is being ambitious to protect its ability to invest at grassroots rugby. So by us being ambitious and trying something a little bit different over in America, we firmly believe that it's got the long-term benefit to be of advantage to all the clubs in Scotland, whilst also giving an opportunity for our players to develop and our coaches to develop. So it's got a number of benefits back here in Scotland.
Now, you've clearly been over there a few times as this deal has been progressing. When the teams are looking to their 2020, 2021 tours, would it be a place that you would advise that any rugby club should be looking at getting over there and taking advantage of this connection as far as a touring team's concerned? Definitely.
I mean, we think there's a number of advantages for clubs, and we love to share that. And bear in mind, we're just at the foothills of establishing the club, but the warmth that we've been received as Scottish Rugby when we've been in Washington by the clubs and by the universities and by the sort of wider city. And we spent some time with the Mayor's office, and the Mayor's office is all about trying to bring people to Washington. And he was so excited about this deal when we were speaking about it, because he could see the benefit of, exactly as you described, clubs coming perhaps over for tours and supporters showing interest in Washington from a rugby perspective. So lots of ancillary benefits. Our focus is getting the club established and off the ground, but I think there's a whole raft of ancillary benefits, and we love people to be part of that.
Let's go back to the Facebook questions. I'm not exactly against this, but believe that I have been more on board with the link if it was discussed with fans first and not after the deal was done. It was kind of out of the blue. What was it important to keep it quiet for business purposes?
Yes.
Good answer.
And I could expand on that just with a sort of obvious answer, which is anything that you do that involves a commercial partner, and a number of commercial partners, needs to be kept relatively private. But I think we've been very open with our supporters that we've got a global outlook. Of course, we think locally. We think about our grassroots. We think about a stadium. We think about our clubs in Scotland. But to protect those, we need to think globally and be in the markets that matter, whether that's Japan, whether that's France, whether that's England, and now America. And we've been quite active in those markets over recent years. So hopefully our fans have seen this as a further development of our global strategy.
How competitive are Old Glory going to be? Is that an impossible question to answer at this stage? But is this going to be a club that everybody in Scotland is going to be proud of supporting?
Well, we love everyone in Scotland's proud of Old Glory and wants to support it. It gives an added interest, hopefully, in that new league. What we want to try and do is create a club that we can all be excited about, and that will take a long time to establish its credentials. But yeah, we're ambitious. We don't want any of our projects, whether that's Nice or London Scottish or support down there, or Glasgow, Edinburgh, to be anything other than successful. So we'll be doing everything that we can within the resources that we have to support Old Glory. But it's about long-term sustainable success and growth. And we're not seeing this as a short-term activity. Our investment is a minority investment, but it's a long-term investment. And our board at Scottish Rugby and our council are being fantastically supportive on our ambition to invest in the markets that matter, because they recognise that Scotland, with a population of 5 million, there's limited growth in terms of revenue. The wider Washington area has got a population of 8.5 million. So being active in that market has got a number of complementary benefits, we believe, back for Scotland.
Well, Dominic, thank you very much for your time. We've got a far greater understanding of who Old Glory are, what we are doing with them, but most importantly why we are doing it, and the benefits for Scottish Rugby and for rugby as a whole. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Al, and thank you everyone for sending in the questions. We're very happy to listen to fans and get their feedback and try and respond whenever we can, so I appreciate doing this.
So Chris, in the back of that conversation, really interested to hear Dominic's thoughts and the business's thoughts on the why we are doing it, but give us some of yours.
Yeah, I think it was a good interview, Al, and good to get some questions from the public. These questions that immediately spring to mind, and I think, in all honesty, they were well answered. My view is that I can see the merit and the sense in it. It sounds like it's a reasonably or a relatively small investment in comparison to what investment Scottish Rugby makes at the moment in all different avenues. I mean, some of the figures here: 3.5 million in grassroots rugby last year alone. Is significant. Obviously over 10 million, around 10 million to run a professional team in Scotland. Player inflation, I think at the moment, is on about a 20% increase year on year in the professional game, so there's a lot of money needed to fund the game, and for a relatively small proportion to be funded elsewhere, I think overall is a good thing. I think if it creates an opportunity for our players to play in a professional league, or some players to play in a professional league, it could create coaching opportunities. But I think it's seen more as an investment than anything else, and the opportunity that it could create money for Scottish Rugby in the long term if the MLR is to boost like it's assumed, with huge investment from broadcasters. Then if you have an equity stake in that, there's potential perhaps to make some money back on a relatively small investment. But from a rugby perspective, it's a tough old league. Scotland played the USA in tour last year, and some of the stars from that game all play in the MLR. Sean Davis, the scrum half, Nate Osberger, who's a sevens player as well, Hanke Gerbenhaus, he's an all-action back row. I think he was maybe man of the match in that game against Scotland. So there's players like that, real hard-edged, tough international players playing. There's also guys like Ben Foden. He's he obviously left England last year, and he plays in New York, Rugby United New York, and a lot of South Sea Islander influence as well. Fetu Vainikolo, who used to play for Connacht, he scored the Tongan winger who I know you played. Did you play when Tonga beat Scotland?
I did play in that game.
He scored the kind of match-winning try from inside his own half.
Thanks for bringing that one
up. So I mean, there are quality players in a hard environment. Some of it isn't professional in the sense that it's 9 to 5 professional training. There's a lot of training done before. Some of these guys then go to work, and then train again in the evening, so they're fully committed, but they have to juggle their lives, which is a great message for maybe some of our younger players who end up in that environment. So I think from a rugby perspective, I think it would be a good opportunity to develop coaches and players. And from an investment opportunity, well, like anything, getting involved with a start-up potentially has a risk, but it's probably the best time to get involved.
I spoke to a couple of our senior players just over the weekend, and I won't mention the names, but they were asking about that. There's the potential to develop players, but there's also the potential that players towards the end, you mentioned Ben Foden there, players towards the end of their career have an opportunity to go and try something completely different that might lead them into, what happens post-rugby as well.
Well, yeah, and the rugby world is forever getting smaller. The world in general, in terms of travel and opportunity, is smaller. So it's much more feasible now than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago to play, more than that, to play overseas. But in 10 or 15 years' time, when some of these guys are maybe coming towards the end of their career as well, who knows what state the MLR will be in. It could be a powerhouse. Absolutely. There's some fantastic athletes. Coaching as well. I mean, Scott Murray was spoken about, Stevie Scott, yep. Both Scottish internationals, coaching in America as well. So some of the players you're talking about may be thinking coaching opportunities as well when they retire in the next few years. So it's another exciting project, and I think it's one that will excite a lot of players and fans to keep an eye on, just to see how it pans out.
And some of the thoughts that were coming in were predominantly around the fact that this money could have been used elsewhere. We pushed Dominic on that. When you look at the Super Six, if this announcement had come before a Super Six was put in place, then you could understand there would be more questions about how are we bridging that gap. But Dominic made the point that the investment is going in already, whether it's into grassroots rugby, Super 6 rugby, women and girls rugby, going from strength to strength, that the investments from Scottish Rugby is they are home based, so this gives us an opportunity to look across the sea.
I think, like anything, the state of the kind of business side, as we all know, just even looking at the attendance and the support, the magnificent support the team get, and even Saturday there, over 36,000 at the quarter final at BT Murrayfield. I think Dominic said in his interview as well that they doubled the turnover and they've decreased the debt down to its lowest level for a long time. So there's obviously a little pot of money that is there to invest that maybe hasn't been there before, and I think it's only wise that you spread your investment. There's a lot of investment in grassroots. There's a lot of investment, a huge investment in the professional game in Scotland. You have, dip your toe at Nice and London Scottish. And don't forget that the commercial opportunities in America and the sponsorship, the broadcasting opportunities are huge. So if you have a stake in that, and no matter how small stake, it can hopefully regenerate finances that will then be put back into Scottish Rugby, potentially at a grassroots or potentially at a home based level. Yeah,
you mentioned my day-to-day job in the commercial world. It is incredibly exciting. Not only the stake and the ability to own that and grow with rugby in America, but also with our current partners and working with them in America, and also having new conversations. So conversations with companies who have that footprint. Dom mentioned Ineos, who are involved with Glasgow. There's an awful lot of businesses who are based over there or based in Scotland who will be working across the different regions. So it'll open up all sorts of new conversations for us as well, which is only a positive.
Yeah, I think that'll be part of it. But as I say, it's probably a long term thing. I think it's quite an ambitious thing. And sometimes when you get into something early or you're first in, it's seen as a little bit of a shock or surprise. Yeah. So I think, as I say, it was good that you were able to push Dom on some of these questions that the listeners and the supporters were sending him.
Yeah, change is always difficult, isn't it? But hopefully time will show that it's been a shrewd investment from a rugby point of view and from a commercial point of view. Let's have a look at the rugby from the weekend, and we'll start, Chris, with the Edinburgh game. I know you were doing the comms. I was listening to you for the second half. Just a disappointing second half, wasn't it? What performance-wise wasn't bad, but just so disappointing to lose that game.
Yeah, disappointing to lose. I don't know quite how to say it without sounding as if it's bad luck. And games don't come down to bad luck. They don't. You either win them or you lose them. But there's an element of Saturday for me. I mean, Edinburgh's shoes, it was bad luck. There was a couple of bounces of the ball, and I know when you've got so much dominance in terms of territory and a lot of possession in the first half, Edinburgh should really have taken more of their chances. But in these knockout games, it is fine margins, and one or two things went against Edinburgh. They did.
Always felt that Munster probably had that other try in them, so yeah, therefore it was more about, you mentioned Edinburgh taking their chances. Yeah.
I actually thought the opposite. I thought during the game, 13-10 for a lot of the second half, it felt as if Edinburgh were much further ahead. They defended a scrum on their own line, an amazing scrum, won a penalty from it, and the whole stadium lifted again and cleared out the lines. And then for the next 4 or 5 minutes, Edinburgh were camped in the Munster 22, and at that point you thought, I can't see a way back for Munster. Edinburgh are dominant. They've ridden the storm with that scrum penalty. They've got an upfield, and then I glanced at the scoreboard and thought, it's only 13-10. It felt as if the whole atmosphere, the whole flow of the game was more than worth a 3-point lead. But it didn't ever extend that lead. And then you're right, with the quality of Munster have, there was always going to be an opportunity for them to come in. But the opportunity for me came from a lack of discipline, and that was probably the one thing that allowed them to get in, because Edinburgh's defence, Edinburgh's set piece, Edinburgh's courage was outstanding.
So how big a moment was the Schumann penalty against Tagburn, where Tagburn went down and stayed down, which meant the referee and the TMO had another look at it, and it seemed to be a huge momentum swing at that stage.
Yeah, it was. I actually thought that at the time I wasn't sure either were a penalty. It was double penalty. It was a late hit or push on Jacko. It was late, but I think it was more a push than a hit. But because it was late, by letter of law, it probably was a penalty. But Jacko didn't make much of it. He popped that back on his feet and tried to get back into the game. And then off the ball, Pierre Schumann moved towards Tyburn and just dipped the shoulder, really. It wasn't a massively aggressive move, but it was a silly move. I think everybody's seen it now. At the time, I wasn't sure because it was hard to see the screen. You obviously get one look at it at the time. And you knew something had happened. I actually thought Munster players had collided with each other. But yeah, it was a foolish one to give away, who'd been playing so well as well, Schumann. As a real fan's favourite. But off the back of it, the kick from Tyler Bladenhall went from his own 10-metre line to deep into the Munster 22. And then, this is where I mean a little bit of the kind of luck went against them. I believe that was a penalty, quite rightly. Great kick, great skill by Bladenhall. But the line-out throw went over the top of the line-out. And you had Van der Vaart, the Edinburgh 10, and Tyler Bladenhall, the Munster 10, both kind of going for the ball as it was overthrown, and it bounces just to the left into the Munster hands. That is a bounce of the ball. It wasn't as if Jaco was slow off the mark. It was a poor throw at the line out, but yet Munster retained possession and they finished the score brilliantly. But that was the key moment. And then secondly, or maybe as important as that, was Munster's defence in the last 6 minutes.
Did you get a phase? I mean, how many phases was
it? I don't
it?
know. Well, it was quite funny because the match clock stopped at 80 minutes in the stadium. Usually it runs on, so you can see your 2.5, 3.5, whatever it is, 4 minutes into overtime. But it was about a minute and a half before the 80, and then the game must have continued for at least 3 minutes after that. All in and around the middle third between the 10-metre lines. So it would have got even more exciting if it crept up the field a wee bit. But
Munster's defence not only being solid, but at times they drove them back almost 20 metres, and then it'd be a half break. And Gilchrist made a half break where they get through again. But not only passive defence, it was dominant defence at time in that last few minutes, and
disciplined,
and very, very
that's
disciplined.
The thing. I mean, there wasn't really a risk to challenge a ball on the ground that wasn't there to be slowed down or tried to be stolen. Discipline for Edinburgh to keep the ball through that number of phases as well. Talking about this morning, I mean, the discipline was excellent, defence was excellent, but it's quite funny because in the stand you can obviously see what's happening. The clock's gone red, so the next time the ball's out, the next time there's an infringement, the game's over. And Munster knew that. They just stacked 14 players in the front line, all stayed on their feet. There was no space. There was one, the fullback was back, Conway was back, but he was back quite deep, just in case Edinburgh wanted to kick long. But actually you need a bit of courage, but arguably the right thing to do there is to dink it or chip it over
the top.
But then if it doesn't,
if it doesn't go well,
I know, but I can think of someone who would maybe do it.
Yeah, true.
He plays at number 10, and it's actually Edinburgh were so close to breaking through, but if you take the emotion, you take the situation out of it, actually the space was in that second in behind that line.
So at any other point in the game, you probably take that risk, don't you? You the 10s, the 9s, assess it and say, no, we need to do something differently here. But at that stage in the game, you're so worried about giving the ball away and losing that you maybe make different decisions in attack.
Yeah, you do, and it's not necessarily say what they did was wrong. It's just the space was actually given to them in a different area, but you don't know. There's more than one ways to attack it. So they decided to keep the ball in hand, and as I say, to keep the ball for, it must have been over 4.5 minutes. Wasn't quite enough, but they threatened, and their focus now looks to the next 3 games in the Guinness PRO14, starting on Saturday. They're away to Scarlets, which is a massive fixture.
It's huge for them. Before we go on and look at that, one thing that it's probably a wider one, we'll come back to it, but one thing that worries me slightly about a game at the moment is the TMOs and the use of the TMOs. Is we heard Johnny Sexton talk about it during the Guinness Six Nations, that players are at times inclined to stay down. You mentioned Jaco jumped back onto his feet, didn't make much of the penalty. I am not suggesting for one moment that Tyburn wasn't hot, but it certainly brought it back to him. Certainly made everybody look at that incident, and ultimately they got the penalty for. Players, rugby, need to make sure we protect that. I'm not going to ask you to pass any more comment on that, other than we'll maybe have a conversation about it at a later date. You mentioned the Pro 14 Scarlets for Edinburgh this weekend. It's a cliche, but absolute must win, isn't it?
Well, it has, as was the last game, against Leinster at home. Richard Cockrell said he got 4 finals really to in the last 4 league games. Obviously there was the 5th game, which was effectively a final as well, knockout rugby in Europe. So and Richard Cockrell made mention of this in his post-match interview as well. He says, "Listen, we recover, but he didn't feel the players, as I agree, couldn't have given any more in terms of their application on Saturday. But then he says we'll just we'll get round to it, and we'll rock up on Monday and we'll go again for what will be a massive game." So they're just, the good thing, as I said last week, for Edinburgh. They've got 3 games left. They're all must win. They have to win if they want to try and qualify for the knockout for the playoff stages. And it's Scarlets away, Ulster at home, and now those 2 teams are both vying for one of those playoff positions as well. So it's more in your hands than out of your hands, because you're actually playing your direct opponents.
And it's a tough one to come back in after Saturday's result. Tough one to come back in today and motivate. You're always motivated, but it's a tough one to get over. It probably helps it's such a big game at the weekend. They don't have the opportunity to feel sorry for themselves. They've got to grab it back and get that win. Now Scarlets is going to be a tough place to go. You feel as if Scarlets are maybe saving themselves in the last few weeks with resting a few guys for this final push into what hopefully for them will be a playoff position. For Edinburgh, as you say, it's must win every single game, and it could easily come down to that last Glasgow-Edinburgh game.
Yeah, that's Scotsman, isn't it? So Scarlets away, Ulster home for Edinburgh, then Glasgow away. Now that Glasgow game could hold massive significance for Edinburgh, but also depending on how Glasgow's run of fixtures go. I know we'll have a look at them in a few minutes, but they're fighting for that top spot. They've already qualified for the playoffs, but you're fighting for that top spot. So with Munster, ironically. So we'll see. But Edinburgh's focus this week has to be learning from last week, putting that behind them, picking a team to win away from home at Scarlets. Scarlets have had a kind of up and down season, really, and had a big spell in the middle of the season where they almost looked as if they'd fallen away.
Yep.
I think the Welsh Grand Slam, with the influence of the players coming back, your Hadley Parks will be back in there, your Ken Owens, Rob Evans, these players, they all sat on the bench for the first half against Cardiff Blues the week previous. came on at half time, made a bit of difference. So winning a Grand Slam and that energy coming back into your squad with quite a big proportion of your squad involved in that will buoy Scarlets. But Edinburgh have to go down there and deliver a winning performance.
The good thing about Edinburgh is they're going into the final 3 games. For them, they hope it's more than 3 games, but they're going in a good position as far as injuries is concerned. They're bringing guys back, key guys back, like John Barclay, the back row we talked about for the European quarter final, how tough that is to make his selection. Now, what that will allow Richard Cotterill to do is not to overwork any players in the next, or including that game at the weekend, but in the next 3, 4, 5 games, his ability to rotate that round. Yeah,
it's a difficult message to get right, though, isn't it? You've said it's all or nothing for each game they come up against. So if that's the message, that's the message. In terms of,
I know it's for me. But I would stick Jamie Ritchie and Magnus Bradbury in this weekend because, you could mix it up where a Bill sits on the bench and he comes off and has a huge impact. Comes on and has a big impact. But by mixing it up, you're keeping it fresh in people's mind as well. It's another cup final. But it's a cup final where they get the opportunity to start.
No, and to be honest, that's a good. They're both good messages, but they're both either stick with what you've got and say, listen, you're the guys in possession, you keep it, or you do mix it up and rotate a little. You can only do that when you've got the quality and the depth of quality, and Edinburgh have that. So it'll be interesting to see. But as I think, as Richard says, these are all one-off games, really, and one leads to another. So the mindset will be right, and the players will hopefully deliver Saturday evening this week.
So, looking at Glasgow's quarter final, Saracens were impressive. They were physical, they were dominant for most of the game. Glasgow started the game incredibly well and finished it well with that, was it consolation try? That try towards the end, but ultimately what happened in the middle was not what Dave Rennie or anybody else in the Glasgow camp wanted. It was I used the word disappointing for the Edinburgh performance. It was certainly a different performance from what went in against Edinburgh. There was an opportunity to go down there and try something different to force Saracens off their stride, which you have to do. Saracens are so good at home, but unfortunately we didn't do that. Didn't fire very many shots, Chris, did we?
No, it's that physicality again, isn't it? It seems to, at the moment, rugby always come back to that, but it's just the collective physicality that Saracens have that Glasgow really couldn't contain. I think Glasgow matched the physicality in parts of the game, but over the 80 minutes fell well short, an accumulative total to, time to really match that. It's 56-27 was the final score, and as you say, scoring in the first minute and the last minute, picking up 14 points there, doesn't cloud the scoreline at all. It certainly helps the scoreline from Glasgow's point of view. but it could have been a bigger margin. So yeah, just physicality. And there was elements of Glasgow's individual performances which were pretty good. The previous results, 13-3 at home in the round one, 13-3 loss at home obviously, and then 38-19 loss away from home, were definitely on the scoreboard closer, but on the field closer as well. It felt closer, whereas this felt as if Saracens were way out in front physically, and the momentum that gave them, it felt as if Glasgow were just hanging at the coattails a wee bit.
Yeah, they dominated the game, didn't they? And Glasgow did get the opportunity to try and get a bit of territory and try and be difficult to play against. Saracens dealt with that pretty well as well. I mean, to go down there and score 27 points is not a bad attacking outfit, but to leak 56 points, I mean, defensively they'll be disappointed, although you and I both spoke briefly to Kenny Murray earlier on. There wasn't a huge amount of one-on-one missed tackles, but it was that momentum, it was the physicality, it was Saracens' ability to get himself into good attacking positions with good quick ball from either the breakdown or the set piece.
Yeah, if the first tackle's not dominant, then if there's subsequent phases, then it's very difficult to try and solve that. So it's almost like the first tackle in any set the most important, because it either puts you in the front foot as a defence, or it lets the attack in behind you, and you're therefore kind of chasing a wee bit more lateral side on tackles, or even chasing back tackles. So the momentum's with the attacking side. And what we mean by physicality, Will Skelton, Billy Vunipola, Brad Barrett, when he comes in that inside centre channel, they're big men. Now they're put down, they're tackled, but their momentum carries them over the gain line, over the advantage line, which makes it difficult on multi-set. Where you have to kind of solve that is either, and where Glasgow are famed for their line speed, is getting up really early, so it's almost hit the man as the ball gets to them, so you're stopping momentum right away.
It's very difficult to keep the line speed in, isn't it, when the first tackle isn't dominant and you're soaking it up. So actually, as a defensive line, your first movement's backwards, so you've got to realign backwards and then try and go forwards. Now, what we then saw was there was one or two guys within the line who were ready to go forward quickly, and at times the spot line speed was good, but collectively it wasn't there.
No, that's right. I mean, if you're sprinting forward in defence and you don't make a tackle, or a tackle's made next to you, then have to sprint back pretty quickly in order to go forward again. So it's difficult to maintain that line speed phase on phase on phase. But the other thing you can do is almost have a flyer out the line, and if you've got one or two players in your team who are basically allowed off the leash to run up and make a collision, make an impact that's going to stop the momentum, you can do that, and you can, as a secondary defensive line, can cover in behind. But keep going back to the physicality, with the size and the ability of some of the Saracens ball carriers, it's really hard to make such a physical collision to stop the momentum. I think you see it now and again. Absolutely, Fraser Brown, from memory, hit it was Jackson Ray, I can't remember who it was, at one point, and completely stopped the momentum. So it's in there, but you're asking the same players to do it over 80 minutes against an incessant attack is pretty difficult. So Glasgow will be disappointed. With it. I suppose the build up to the game being what it is in the history, between the two sides, they'll be disappointed that they fell so far.
You could see the frustration from that side of it as well, isn't it? There's been an awful lot said over the last few years, actually, between the sides, and put chucking in the Cutter Cup matches into the mix as well, where there's some personality clashes, let's call them. But you could see in the last 10-15 minutes it was hurting even more because of that as well. The enjoyment that Saracens was getting was evident, as well as the hurt that the Glasgow players were feeling. Dave Rennie's got a different task to Richard Cockrell. Richard Cockrell, although they lose that game, there's still a huge amount they can take from it, albeit ultimately disappointed to be out of Europe. Dave Rennie needs to turn it around completely this week with Ulster coming.
Yeah, Ulster coming Friday night to Scotland, and we know how strong Glasgow are at home with their home support. Ulster, what a game that was as well. Narrowly losing out at the Viva to their rivals Leinster 21-18. Jacob Stockdale is he's been pointed to for the mistake he made and dropping the ball over the line. But
did you see it?
I saw it. Yeah.
I mean, to do so well to get into that position to score that try, and that's what Dan McFarlane talked about. I mean, the ability for him to get in there. But I mean, we've talked about it. I've sat in many meetings when we've talked about putting the ball down with two hands. Freddie Burns had a bad one.
I think it was different to the Freddie Burns ones, because it wasn't. I don't believe there was. Freddie Burns broke through and he was having a look around and almost, not showboating, but almost like I'd switched off. I think that was just more of a skill error than anything with Jacob Stockdale. But you're right, as soon as you get there, you can sense his players around about. You go low and hard at the line, either with two hands or you die.
I'm gonna leave this one. It's not an experience I've had all that much running over the line, wondering how I was going to put the ball down. Normally I was falling over it from less than a metre out. But I mean, you can see how he apologised to the Ulster fans, apologised to the group within the huddle, and then went into the changing rooms and put his hands up as well. He was clearly hurting.
Well, he'll hurt more than anybody else, you know. And you know, it did happen to me actually.
Oh, here we go.
I was playing for Edinburgh away in Cast in a European game a few years back, and I didn't drop it. I was going over to score, I was tackled around my legs, and I went out to reach to place the ball, and as I kind of went to place it, my arm was hit and the ball fell out. So
that's a wee bit different.
But I should have scored, to be honest. And Andy Robinson was the coach at the time, and I was like, oh no. As soon as you know, as soon as you're on the moment, oh no, here we go. And it kind of plays in your mind. Andy didn't say, it was a Friday night game away in France, didn't say anything at all. And I was like, oh no, the whole kind of we actually won the game, which was a wee bit better.
Yeah, it makes it a bit easier.
Mark Robinson got me out of jail. He scored a wonder try just a few minutes later. But Andy, I thought, how's he going to deal with this? What's it going to be? Of course, review meeting Monday morning. Here he comes, goes to the video, and he showed it and never said anything. And of course, you're like, listen, completely my fault. I should have got the ball down. This, that, next thing, and you know, expecting the worst. But he was quite cute, Andy. He actually says, well, I want to rewind it. I take your apology, absolutely. You get to the line, you score it, you get the ball down, simple as that. He says, but and he asked the player, says, who was involved in 3 or 4 instances in the 3 or 4 plays leading up to that? And I was thinking, who's he going with this? Who's this? But it turned out it was me. I'd blades come off at one instance, cleared it another. I'd made a link pass and support. So it was actually my 4th or 5th touch in that phase of play, which made me feel a wee bit better. So it was a kind way of saying, listen, you know, he messed up, but actually the involvement in it was quite important before, just in case the rest of the players wanted to batter.
That's great. And then, I thought Dan McFarlane, the way Dan McFarlane spoke after the game was great as well. He instantly went and defended Stockdale, talked about how not many players would have got themselves that position, talked about the fact, and you mentioned it there, Stockdale, he'll be hurting more than anybody else, and he realises what he's done. So, you know, when you've got a coach who's got the ability to, it's not like anybody, well, if anybody at any point brushes it and doesn't care, then there'll be a different reaction from the coach, I would imagine. But for a coach to realise how much it means to somebody and defend them, I think is very important.
Mind you, when we were walking down the stairs after the team meeting, it was 1-on-1. He grabbed me and said, you do that again, that's it.
So Glasgow Ulster on Friday night. You know, it's a massive game for Ulster as well. And it's a massive game for Edinburgh. Yeah. It's as I said, different challenge for Dave to try and make sure that the guys bounce back after the weekend. They will review it, or have reviewed it already, and then we'll look to shelf that completely and move forward. Well,
it's a shorter turnaround as well. It's Saturday night, or Saturday afternoon game, obviously, to a Friday night, so it's a day less in preparation, which is a good thing when you come off a defeat like that, unless there's, you know, it obviously gives you less time to recover from knocks and bumps. But let's hope Glasgow get back to winning ways at Scots, and I think they will. I think they'll get back to winning ways that can be accurate and get some of these lads on the field and fighting for that home semi-final. Yeah,
the only concern at the moment with Glasgow is there's a few injuries. Obviously Stuart Hogg came back at the weekend, but you see Ryan Wilson running water. Hugh Jones is still struggling. Tim Swinson took one at the weekend. Tommy Seymour couldn't play at the weekend. Nick Grigg, to mention just a few. It's important to have as many guys fit at the end of the season. Now, some of these guys are, I believe, coming back reasonably soon, which would add a wee bit of impetus, but you need to carry that momentum on, and that's something Dave Rennie's already talked about from the Six Nations last year. Wasn't able to carry that momentum on into the closing part of the league, of the Pro 14, but Glasgow are in a stronger position this year. Yeah,
and they've got everyone talks about learning and understanding and you know, moving on, and they've got that I suppose reasonably fresh memory of the semi-final last year. It's quite a similar, I know we're not at the semi-final stage yet, but it's quite a similar set of circumstances, having to deal with the disappointment of Saturday losing in Europe, but then the carrot is you've got the opportunity to make things a lot better in the league. So I think I'm expecting Glasgow to make a statement this weekend, and it would help both Edinburgh and Glasgow if they can.
I know you were having a close look at the club semi-finals at the weekend as well. You want to run us through the results?
Yeah, Scottish Cup semi-finals at the weekend. It was a couple of close games actually. Herets came out in top 31-29 at home to Hawick. Herets got a couple of early tries, and then Hawick came roaring back into it. They were 29-24 ahead just with going into the final 10 minutes, but Heriots managed to score a try. Josh Scott scored and converted by Ross Jones, so that put them ahead. So Heriots will place Ayr in the cup final this week. Ayr went down to the Green Yards, one away from home, 19-12. Again, Melrose were 12-0 up at one point, and Ayr had to fight back. Heriots will play Ayr in the Scottish Cup, but also in the tennis Premiership as well.
It's going to be a good, interesting finish between Heriots and Ayr in the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Two top sides. The tennis Premiership finals first, that's at Millbrae, and that's Saturday the 6th of April, and then as part of Silver Saturday at BT Murrayfield, the second leg of the head-to-head will be the cup final. Ayr play Heriots. So yeah, great for the club players to fight to the end of the season, to get used to winning the playoffs and under pressure. Good travelling support at both games as well, as there was last week. The game was at Goldenacre. So yeah, it's a healthy rivalry, but certainly the two teams are going to go head to head in a couple of big games in the next few weeks.
And many of those players that will be playing in both the league final and the cup final will be potentially probably moving on into the Super 6 teams of next year as well, which adds another dynamic to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and it's all, I mean, it's high level competition. It is good stuff. I mean, even for Ayr at the weekend, guys like Paddy Kelly were playing. Kyle Rowe scored a kind of definitive try really for Ayr. So making big impacts as well. So the Heriots had made a few changes, but Hoyk really dug in and just came up short. But tries from Jack Blaine for Heriots early on, so he played well. Obviously under 20s, he turned out friendly. So the standard of players is pretty high, and then the standard of rugby's also high.
Probably the last thing for us to do is to wish both our men's and women's team best of luck over in Hong Kong for the Sevens this weekend. The women's team in particular have got a big challenge ahead to try and qualify for the World Series in the coming years, but they've talked about the fact they've managed to take the strongest squad ever assembled from a women's point of view, so I'm sure they'll do incredibly well over there. Yeah,
women's, as you say, the series 7 series qualifier in Hong Kong. They play Belgium, Japan and Mexico in day one, which is Thursday, and then see where they progress to the knockout stages on the Friday. And the men are they're in Hong Kong Sevens obviously this weekend, so their group, as always in the World Series, the groups are pretty tough. It's Scotland share a group with South Africa, Samoa and Japan in the men's one, so we wish them the best of luck.
Well as keeping your eye on the Pro14 Rugby this weekend, hopefully getting to one or two of the games. Keep your eye on how the Sevens boys and girls are doing over in Hong Kong. So Chris, this is the second time they've managed to unleash us by ourselves. We're on the road as well this weekend with Clyde Bank Studios. Thanks very much to Clyde for letting us in to use these studios. I don't think we've broken anything. Have you been pressing any buttons?
I've got one button to press. It's start and stop on the record function here. I think we're alright. I think we got by.
Does that mean that you're the IT side of this podcast as well as the rugby?
No, just when we came in, they obviously thought that guy's far more sensible. We'll put him in front of the laptop, and you're sitting in the bucket in the corner.
Well, all it remains for us to say is goodbye, and for you to press the button. Is that really us?
Yes, let's go. Right, thanks, folks. I don't know.
Well, you pressed the wrong button, haven't you?
No, it's fine.
Keep that in.
It's in. Bye. Oh no, it's not pressed, is it?
I hope it's not.
Oh no, I don't know if we're starting again.
Have we recorded anything? Have you?
Why is it like, honestly? Oh no, I pressed stop. I pressed the blue button.